The acceptance letter from Stanford lay on my desk, mocking me with its promises of a future I thought was finally within reach. I'd spent the last hour staring at my bank account balance, refreshing the page over and over, hoping there was some mistake. There wasn't. My college fund, all $47,000 of it, had vanished, leaving behind a measly $840. I'm Deborah, and this was supposed to be my moment. After years of straight A's, volunteer work, and sacrificing my social life to build the perfect college application, everything was falling apart. "Mom!" I shouted, storming downstairs with my laptop. "What happened to my college fund?" My mother, Michaela, was in the kitchen preparing dinner with my brother Jason and his girlfriend Laura. They were laughing about something, but the sound died as soon as they saw my face. "Honey, what's wrong?" Mom wiped her hands on her apron, frowning. "My college fund is empty. Almost $50,000, gone." My voice cracked. "Please tell me this is some kind of banking error." The kitchen fell silent. Jason suddenly became very interested in chopping vegetables, while Lara shifted uncomfortably beside him. "About that," Mom started, exchanging a glance with Jason. "Your brother needed the money for something important." "Important?" I repeated, my stomach dropping. As if on cue, Lara raised her left hand, and a massive diamond ring caught the light. My world tilted sideways as the pieces clicked into place. "You took my college fund to buy an engagement ring?" I whispered, staring at Jason in disbelief. "Deb, listen." Jason turned to face me, his expression pleading. "I'll pay you back, I promise." But this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I needed to show Lara how much she means to me. "Oh, once in a lifetime?" I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "What about my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go to Stanford?" "Stanford will still be there," Mom said soothingly. "You can take a gap year, work, and save up." "Are you serious right now?" I cut her off. "You're defending this?" "Love is important, Deborah," Mom insisted. "Jason and Lara are starting their life together. This is a beautiful moment for our family." "Beautiful?" My voice rose. "He stole from me. That money was for my education." Lara looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Jason, you said the ring was from your savings." "It was a family decision," Mom interjected before Jason could respond. "We all agreed." "I never agreed to anything." I slammed my laptop shut. "Dad would never—" "Your father understands that family supports family," Mom said firmly. "Jason will pay you back eventually." Eventually? I was shaking now. "I need that money for fall semester. I've already accepted Stanford's offer." "You're being selfish," Jason said, his tone hardening. "This is bigger than just you, Lara and I." "Selfish?" I stepped back, feeling like I'd been slapped. "You steal my future, and I'm the selfish one?" I looked around the kitchen, at Jason's defensive stance, Mom's disapproving frown, and Lara's guilty expression, and realized with crushing clarity that they saw nothing wrong with what had happened. In their minds, Jason's romantic gesture trumped my education. "I'm calling Dad," I announced, pulling out my phone. "He's in a meeting," Mom said quickly, "and he agrees with our decision." That's when I knew. Dad had no idea. The tears I'd been holding back started falling. "You know what?" I grabbed my car keys from the counter. "This isn't over. What you did is illegal, Jason. You can't just take money that isn't yours." "Don't be dramatic," Jason scoffed. "We're family. You can't sue family." "Watch me," I spat, heading for the door. "Deborah Hopkins, don't you dare walk out that door," Mom called after me. I turned back one last time. That money represented everything I've worked for, everything I've dreamed of, and you all decided it meant nothing compared to a stupid ring. "Love means sacrifice," Mom said softly. "Yeah?" I wiped my eyes angrily. "Well, I hope that ring was worth it, because you just sacrificed one daughter to buy another." I slammed the door behind me, my hands shaking as I got into my car. As I pulled out of the driveway, I could see Mom and Jason watching from the window. They probably thought I'd cool off and come back, ready to accept their twisted logic about family and love. They were wrong. I pulled up Google on my phone and typed, "lawyers near me." If my family wouldn't fight for my future, I'd do it myself. The law office of Griffin and Associates looked more like a trendy startup than a place where people's lives got put back together. I sat across from Hamza Griffin, trying not to fidget as he reviewed my bank statements. "Let me get this straight," he said, looking up from the papers. "Your brother withdrew $47,000 from your college fund to buy an engagement ring?" "Yes." I twisted the tissue in my hands. "My mom claims they had the right because it's a family account, but my name is the only one on it. My grandparents set it up specifically for my education." Hamza leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes sharp. "They didn't. Your brother committed theft, and your mother is an accessory. This is clear-cut." "Can you help me get it back?" "Absolutely. But are you prepared for what this means? Taking legal action against family is never easy." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Another text from Mom. "Family dinner tonight. We need to talk about this rationally. Please come home." I showed Hamza the message. He nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, this could be good. Go to dinner, record everything. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case." 2 hours later, I walked into my childhood home. The smell of Mom's lasagna filled the air, but my stomach was too knotted to feel hungry. "Deborah!" Dad rushed to hug me. "Where have you been? We've been worried sick." "Really?" I pulled away. "Did Mom tell you what happened?" Dad's expression tightened. "Let's discuss this calmly over dinner." Everyone was already seated at the table. Mom, Jason, and Lara. The diamond on her finger caught the light, and I had to look away. "I spoke to a lawyer today," I announced, sitting down. The clatter of silverware stopped. "You what?" Jason's face reddened. "Are you insane?" "No, I'm being practical. You stole my money, Jason. That's a crime." "Nobody stole anything," Mom interjected. "We redistributed family resources." "Stop." Dad's voice cut through the tension. "What exactly happened to Deborah's college fund?" Mom and Jason exchanged glances. "You didn't tell him?" I laughed bitterly. "Of course you didn't." "Tell me what?" Dad demanded. "Jason took my entire college fund to buy Lara's engagement ring, and Mom helped him do it." The color drained from Dad's face. "Is this true?" "Anton, please understand." Mom reached for his hand. "Jason needed to make a grand gesture. With our daughter's education money?" Dad stood up so quickly, his chair fell backward. "Have you both lost your minds?" "Dad, I can explain," Jason started. "Explain what? How you stole your sister's future?" Dad turned to Mom. "And you allowed this?" "Love requires sacrifice." Mom repeated her mantra from yesterday. "Then Jason should have sacrificed his own money," Dad shouted. "Not his sister's." Lara suddenly pushed back from the table. I can't wear this ring knowing where it came from." Her hands trembled as she tried to remove it. "Babe, don't," Jason pleaded. "This isn't about the ring anymore. This is about family loyalty." "Loyalty?" I stood up. "You want to talk about loyalty? Where was your loyalty when you decided my dreams meant nothing compared to your romantic gestures?" I found something interesting today," I continued, pulling out my phone. "Mom's been helping Jason make unauthorized withdrawals for months. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. You were testing to see if I'd notice, weren't you?" Mom's face went pale. "How did you—" "Bank records don't lie, Mom. The lawyer said it's all documented." "You're really going through with this?" Jason asked incredulously. "You'd drag our family through court? You did this," I said quietly. "Not me. I'm just trying to get back what's mine." "I'll write you a check right now," Jason said desperately. "We can forget this whole thing." "Can we? Can we forget how easily you betrayed me? How Mom chose you over me? How you both lied to Dad?" Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm calling my lawyer first thing tomorrow. This ends now." "Anton!" Mom gasped. "No, Michaela. Our daughter worked her whole life for Stanford. I won't let anyone, not even her brother, take that away from her." I looked at my father with tears in my eyes. Finally, someone was in my corner. You have until tomorrow to return the money, Dad told Jason, or Deborah's lawyer will file charges. Your choice. As I left that night, I heard Mom crying and Jason arguing with Lara. The family was fracturing, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt strong. Sometimes fighting for yourself means being willing to break what's already broken to build something better. My phone buzzed. A text from Hamza. How did it go? I typed back. Exactly as planned. We have everything on record. The game was on, and this time, I wasn't backing down. Hamza spread the financial documents across his desk, like he was dealing cards. Your mother's been busy, he said, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. These withdrawals go back further than just your college fund. I leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. What do you mean? Look at these transfers from your grandparents' estate. Money that was meant to be held in trust keeps disappearing into various accounts. A knock at the door interrupted us. Hamza's assistant poked her head in. Ms. Wells is here to see you. My heart stopped. Lara walked in, clutching her designer purse like a shield. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, she said, hovering by the door. But I need to tell you something. Hamza gestured to an empty chair. Please sit. Jason doesn't know I'm here. Lara twisted the engagement ring on her finger. But I can't sleep at night knowing what he did. What they all did. What do you mean, they all? I asked. Last night, after the dinner, I overheard Jason and your mom talking. They're planning to hide assets. Move money around so you can't trace it. Lara's voice shook. They mentioned something about offshore accounts and your grandparents' inheritance. Hamza started taking notes. Can you be more specific? They're meeting with someone today, a financial advisor who specializes in creative accounting. That's how they phrased it. Lara finally looked at me. I'm so sorry, Deborah. I had no idea about any of this when Jason proposed. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Found something in your mom's office. Come home while she's out. I have to go. I stood up abruptly. My dad found something. I'll come with you, Hamza said, gathering his briefcase. We need to document everything. 20 minutes later, we were in Mom's home office. Dad was already there, pulling files from a hidden compartment behind her desk drawer. Look at this! He handed me a stack of papers. Bank statements, transfer records, letters from your grandparents' lawyer. Your mother's been systematically draining accounts for years, Hamza said, reviewing the documents. Not just Deborah's college fund. I've been such a fool. Dad sank into Mom's chair. I trusted her to handle all our finances. I never questioned. The front door slammed. Anton, why is there a car I don't recognize in our driveway? Mom's voice drifted up the stairs. Footsteps approached. What are you all doing in my office? Mom froze in the doorway, her face draining of color when she saw the open drawer, the scattered papers. How long have you been stealing from us, Michaela? Dad's voice was deadly quiet. I haven't stolen anything. I've been protecting our family's interests. By draining our daughter's college fund, by hiding money from your own parents' estate. You don't understand, Mom's voice rose. Jason needed. Stop lying, I shouted. This isn't about Jason anymore. This is about years of theft and manipulation. Mom's phone rang. She glanced at it, then quickly declined the call. That was Jason, wasn't it? I asked. Warning you that Lara came to see me? Mom's expression confirmed it. Mrs. Hopkins, Hamza stepped forward. I suggest you contact your own lawyer. We have enough evidence here to… Evidence? Mom laughed hysterically. You think you can come into my house, go through my private papers? Papers that prove you've been embezzling money, Dad cut in. From our children, from your parents. I did everything for this family. Mom's composure cracked. Every penny went to giving us a better life. A better life? I gestured around the office. Like that cruise you took last year? Or Jason's new car? Was that worth destroying my future? You ungrateful! Mom lunged for the papers in Hamza's hands. Dad caught her arm. Don't make this worse, Michaela. A new voice joined the chaos. Mom? What's going on? Jason stood in the doorway, his face darkening when he saw Hamza. "They're trying to destroy our family," Mom cried. "Your sister brought a lawyer into our home." After you and Jason met with a financial advisor to hide evidence," I shot back. "Yeah, Lara told me everything." Jason's face went red. "She what?" "Game's over," Hamza said calmly. "We have enough to file charges against both of you. The only question is, how much worse do you want to make this for yourselves?" Mom collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Jason stood frozen, looking lost. Dad picked up his car keys. "I'm calling my lawyer, and then I'm calling your grandparents. They deserve to know what you've done with their money." As we left the office, I heard Mom sobbing and Jason trying to call Lara. The house of cards was finally falling, and no amount of family loyalty could prop it up anymore. The manila envelope arrived at Hamza's office 3 days after the confrontation. No return address, just my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside were bank statements, old emails, and a handwritten letter that made my hands shake. "Read this." I thrust the letter at Hamza. "It's from my grandmother, dated 2 months before she died." He adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud. "Dearest Michaela, I'm writing to express my deep disappointment. The trust fund was established for both your children's education, not for your personal use. If you don't return the money you've taken, I'll have no choice but to involve my lawyers." "She knew," I whispered. "Grandma knew Mom was stealing before she died." My phone lit up with a text from Lara. "Jason's at my apartment. He's desperate. Can we meet?" 20 minutes later, I walked into a coffee shop to find Lara sitting with a tall woman I recognized as her mother, Sadie. "Thank you for coming," Sadie said, her expression grave. "We need to talk about Jason." "He showed up at our house at midnight," Lara explained, her eyes red from crying. "He's saying you're trying to frame your mother, that none of this is true." "I have proof." I pulled out copies of the documents. "Everything's here. The unauthorized withdrawals, the hidden accounts, the letter from my grandmother." Sadie examined the papers, her frown deepening. "This is serious, Lara. We're talking about years of financial fraud." "I know." Lara twisted her engagement ring. "That's why I—" The bell above the door chimed. Jason burst in, his face flushed with anger. "So this is where you've been hiding?" He spat at Lara. Then he saw me. "Of course. Turning my own fiancé against me wasn't enough?" "Jason," Sadie stood up. "Sit down and lower your voice." "Stay out of this," Jason snapped. "This is family business." "It became my business when you used stolen money to propose to my daughter." "It wasn't stolen. It was a family account." "Stop lying," I cut in. "We have Grandma's letter. She knew what Mom was doing." Jason's face went pale. "What letter?" I slid the envelope across the table. As he read, his hands started trembling. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I pulled out my phone. "Should I play the recording from Mom's office? Or maybe we should call Grandpa and ask about the trust fund Mom drained." "You don't understand," Jason's voice cracked. "Mom was just trying to help me get started in life. The ring, my car, my apartment. See, all bought with stolen money," Sadie finished. "Money meant for both children's education." "I can fix this." Jason turned to Lara. "Baby, please, just give me time to sort this out." Lara slowly pulled off her engagement ring. "I can't marry someone who would steal from his own sister." "Lara, don't." "She's right," Sadie said firmly. "Until this is resolved legally, I don't want you contacting my daughter." Jason's face twisted with rage. He grabbed the envelope, scattering papers across the table. "You've ruined everything," he shouted at me. "Mom was right. You're nothing but a selfish little—" "That's enough." A barista approached our table. "Sir, I need you to leave before I call the police." Jason looked around, suddenly aware of the other customers staring. His shoulders slumped. "This isn't over," he muttered, heading for the door. "I'll double whatever you lost. Just drop the lawsuit." "It's not about the money anymore," I called after him. "It's about the truth." After he left, Lara broke down crying. Sadie hugged her daughter while I gathered the scattered documents. I found something else, I said quietly, pulling out another paper. Mom's been paying Jason's rent, his car payments, everything, all from accounts that weren't hers to touch. He knew where the money was coming from. He's as guilty as she is. What are you going to do? Lara asked, wiping her eyes. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Your mother's gone. Packed a bag and left, not answering her phone. Looks like Mom's running. I showed them the message. But it's too late. Hamza's filing the lawsuit tomorrow. I'll testify, Lara said suddenly, about everything I overheard, about Jason's confession. All of it. Sadie squeezed her daughter's hand. We both will. Some things are more important than protecting people who refuse to protect themselves. As I drove home, I thought about Jason's offer to pay me double. He still didn't get it. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about years of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The truth was finally coming out, and no amount of money could buy back the trust they'd broken. The lawsuit would be filed in the morning. There was no turning back now. The media's going to have a field day with this, Hamza said, spreading the morning newspaper across his desk. The headline screamed, Local family fraud, mother and son accused of stealing college fund. I didn't want it to go public, I sighed, scanning the article. How did they find out? Your mother did that. Hamza handed me his tablet. She's been posting on social media, playing the victim, claims you're destroying the family over a simple misunderstanding. Before I could respond, his office door burst open. Mom stormed in, looking nothing like the polished woman I remembered. Her hair was messy, her makeup smeared. How dare you? She snarled at Hamza. Filing charges without even trying to negotiate? Mrs. Hopkins, you need to leave. Hamza stood up. Any communication should go through your lawyer. I'm here to talk to my daughter. Mom turned to me, her voice softening. Sweetheart, please, drop this lawsuit. We can work something out. Like you worked something out with Grandma? I pulled out her letter. She gave you a chance to make things right, and you ignored her. Mom's face crumpled. You don't understand. Your brother needed... Stop! I slammed my hand on the desk. Stop making this about Jason. This is about you stealing from everyone who trusted you. Your father's filing for divorce, she whispered. Is that what you wanted? To tear our family apart? You did that yourself, I said. Where have you been the past 3 days anyway? She wouldn't meet my eyes. Taking care of things. Moving money around? Hamza asked casually. Because we've already frozen all the accounts we could trace. Mom's phone rang. She glanced at it, then quickly declined the call. That's the third time you've ignored Jason's call since you walked in, I noted. Trouble in paradise? He's... struggling, Mom admitted. The publicity is affecting his job. His apartment complex is evicting him since the rent payments were fraudulent. Actions have consequences, Hamza said. Speaking of which, we have a meeting with the DA tomorrow. Mom's face went white. The DA? But this is a civil matter. Financial fraud is a criminal offense, Hamza explained, especially when it involves trust funds and estates. A commotion outside the office drew our attention. Jason's voice carried through the door. I don't care if I don't have an appointment. He burst in, followed by Hamza's flustered assistant. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes wild. You have to stop this, he begged. They're investigating me at work. Lara won't return my calls. Everything's falling apart. Maybe you should have thought about that before stealing my future, I said coldly. I'll pay you back. Double, triple. Jason ran his hands through his hair. Mom, tell her. I can't. Mom's voice broke. The accounts. They're empty. I tried to access them this morning. What? Jason stared at her. What about the offshore accounts? The investments? Frozen, Hamza smiled. Along with evidence of tax evasion we've forwarded to the IRS. You promised you had it handled. Jason turned on Mom. You said nobody could trace it. I tried, Mom started crying. But your sister's lawyer is very good at his job, Hamza finished. Now, unless you both want to confess and make restitution, I suggest you leave. Restitution? Jason laughed hysterically. I lost my job this morning, my apartment, everything. Then I guess you know how it feels to have your future stolen. I stood up. The difference is, you did this to yourself. A knock at the door revealed Lara and Sadie. They froze at the scene before them. Perfect timing, Hamza said. We were just discussing tomorrow's meeting with the DA. You? Jason stared at Lara. You're helping them? I'm helping the truth come out, Lara said quietly. Someone has to. We have your confession on record, Sadie added. From the coffee shop? Very admissible in court. Mom sank into a chair, all fight leaving her. It's over, Jason. We've lost. No. Jason straightened his tie, desperation turning to determination. I won't let you ruin me. I'll tell them everything. How it was all your idea. How you manipulated me. Jason, Mom gasped. Every withdrawal, every hidden account, he continued. I'll tell them everything if you don't fix this. I watched my brother and mother turn on each other, their carefully constructed world of lies crumbling. Tomorrow, they'd face the DA. Their crimes would be laid bare, their excuses exposed. But right now, watching them destroy each other, I realized I'd already won something more valuable than money. I'd found my strength, my voice, and people who stood by the truth no matter what. The rest was just paperwork. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. I gripped Hamza's arm as we pushed through the crowd, their questions hitting like bullets. Deborah, how does it feel to sue your own family? Is it true your brother used your college fund for an engagement ring? No, any comment on your mother's social media posts? Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Dad sat in the front row with his lawyer, looking like he'd aged 10 years. Behind him sat Lara and Sadie, both dressed formally for their testimony. Mom and Jason entered from the other door with their lawyers. Mom wore her favorite pearl necklace, her armor for important occasions. Jason had shaved and wore a new suit, playing the role of the repentant son. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. The opening statements were a blur of legal terminology, but the real drama started when Mom took the stand. Mrs. Hopkins, Hamza approached her, can you explain why you felt entitled to access your daughter's college fund without her knowledge or consent? I was protecting my family's interests, Mom's voice wavered. As a mother, please answer the question directly. Did you or did you not knowingly transfer funds from an account designated solely for your daughter's education? Yes, but. And were you aware that your own mother confronted you about similar unauthorized withdrawals from her estate before her death? Mom's face crumpled. She didn't understand. Jason needed, Your Honor, Hamza interrupted, producing documents. I'd like to enter into evidence this letter from the deceased Mrs. Margaret Wilson, expressing her knowledge of the defendant's systematic theft from family accounts. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Mom's lawyer looked pained. Jason was next on the stand. He'd barely sat down when he started talking. I want to confess, he blurted out. Mom told me the money was from a family account. She handled everything. I didn't know. Oh, objection! Mom's lawyer jumped up. My client's son is clearly under duress. Your Honor, Jason's lawyer intervened. My client wishes to make a full statement. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Proceed, Mr. Hopkins. Mom's been moving money around for years. Jason's words tumbled out. She said it was her right as family manager. The engagement ring, my apartment, my car. She handled all the payments. I didn't ask where the money came from. I didn't want to know. Mom let out a choked sob. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand on shaking legs. Ms. Hopkins, Hamza began, when did you first discover the theft? When I checked my account after receiving my Stanford acceptance letter. My voice grew stronger as I spoke. Nearly $50,000 was gone. When I confronted my family, my mother and brother tried to justify it as a family decision. They said love required sacrifice. My sacrifice. And how did this affect your education plans? Stanford was my dream. I worked my entire life for that acceptance letter. In one moment, my own family stole that future from me. Not just the money, but the trust, the security of knowing your family has your back. The judge interrupted. Ms. Hopkins, your academic record is exceptional. Full scholarship offers from several universities. Why was Stanford so important? I looked directly at Mom and Jason. Because I earned it. Every grade, every volunteer hour, every late night studying. That was my work, my future. And they decided their wants were more important than my dreams. Lara's testimony came next, describing the conversations she'd overheard about hiding assets. Then, Sadie presented records of the fraudulent rent payments for Jason's apartment. Finally, Dad took the stand. He looked broken, but determined. I trusted my wife to manage our finances, he said quietly. I failed my daughter by not paying attention, but I'm here to make it right. The judge called a brief recess before delivering her decision. In the hallway, Jason approached me. Deb, please. His voice cracked. I'll do anything. Just ask them to go easy on us. You had chances to make this right, I stepped back. Many chances. This is what accountability looks like. When court resumed, Judge Martinez didn't mince words. The evidence of long-term financial fraud is overwhelming, she began. This court orders full restitution of all misappropriated funds, plus interest. Furthermore, given the criminal nature of these actions, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Mom collapsed against her lawyer. Jason put his head in his hands. Additionally, the judge continued, I am issuing an order freezing all remaining assets pending criminal investigation. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. But this time, I faced them. Today isn't about revenge, I said clearly. It's about justice, about standing up for yourself even when the people who should protect you are the ones causing harm. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment my family's facade finally shattered completely. The media coverage exploded overnight. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications from news outlets and social media. Local morning shows played clips from my courthouse statement on repeat. You've gone viral, Hamza said, showing me his tablet. Your story's resonating with people. Look at these comments. I scrolled through hundreds of supportive messages from people sharing similar stories of family betrayal and financial abuse. The hashtag #StandLikeDeborah was trending. A knock at Hamza's office door made us both look up. It was Lara, clutching a newspaper. Have you seen this? She spread out the paper. The headline read, Family Fraud Case Expands. Multiple victims come forward. 3 other families have contacted my office, Hamza explained. Your mother apparently managed their finances too. The DA is building a larger case. My phone rang. Dad's number. Honey! His voice was tight. Your mother's been arrested. They found her trying to access a safety deposit box at the bank. She had passport and tickets to Mexico. Before I could process this, another call beeped through. An unknown number. Ms. Hopkins? A woman's voice asked. This is Sandra from Stanford's financial aid office. We've been following your case, and in light of the circumstances, we'd like to discuss your options for the upcoming semester. I put the phone on speaker as Sandra continued. The university would like to offer you a hardship scholarship. Your academic record is exceptional, and we believe you've demonstrated remarkable resilience. Tears welled up in my eyes. Lara squeezed my hand. Additionally, Sandra added, several alumni have reached out wanting to contribute to your education fund after seeing your story. After the call, Hamza's assistant rushed in. Jason's here. He's insisting on seeing you. My brother looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same suit from court. They arrested Mom, he said unnecessarily. She was trying to run, just like she taught us. When things get tough, protect yourself first. What do you want, Jason? I made a deal with the DA. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Full confession, testimony against Mom, in exchange for a lighter sentence. They're still pressing charges, but... He swallowed hard. I'm looking at probation instead of jail time. You turned on Mom pretty quick, I observed. She turned on me first. He ran his hands through his hair. That safety deposit box? It had nearly 100,000 in cash. She was going to leave me here to face everything alone. Like mother, like son, Lara said coldly from behind me. You were ready to throw her under the bus in court, remember? Jason finally noticed her presence. Lara, baby, please. Don't. She held up her hand. I came to return this. She placed the engagement ring on Hamza's desk. Sell it. Add it to Deborah's restitution. It's worth at least 40,000, Jason protested weakly. Stolen money buys stolen dreams, Lara quoted my courthouse statement. Goodbye, Jason. After she left, Jason slumped in a chair. I lost everything. My job, my fiancé, my freedom. You lost things you never really had, I corrected him. Everything was built on lies and stolen money. Dad won't even look at me, he continued. The divorce papers were delivered yesterday. 25 years of marriage, gone. Actions have consequences. I repeated Hamza's words from earlier. The DA wants me to wear a wire, Jason said suddenly. Mom's been contacting other people, trying to move more money. They think there's a whole network. And you agreed? What choice do I have? He laughed bitterly. It's either help them or go down with her. I learned that much from Mom. Save yourself first. My phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Mom's arrest was now breaking news, complete with her mugshot. I never meant for any of this to happen. Jason stood up. I wanted to give Lara the perfect proposal. Mom made it sound so simple. Nothing about stealing is simple, I said. You both just pretended it was. As he reached the door, he turned back. Stanford called me too, asked if I wanted to make a statement about my regret and journey to redemption or something. Apparently, they're doing a whole piece on financial abuse in families. What did you say? I told them to talk to you instead. He attempted a weak smile. You're the hero of this story, sis. I'm just the cautionary tale. After he left, Hamza showed me another newspaper article. The headline caught my eye. From victim to victor. How one student's stand against family fraud inspired a movement. Ready to tell your story to a bigger audience? He asked. I thought about all the comments I'd read, all the people finding courage in my experience. Yes, I said firmly. It's time more people learned that family doesn't mean letting yourself be victimized. My phone lit up with another call from Stanford. The future I'd fought for was calling, and this time, nothing would stop me from answering. The Stanford campus sprawled before me, exactly as beautiful as I'd imagined. I adjusted my laptop on the auditorium podium, facing the packed room of students, faculty, and reporters. Thank you all for coming, I began. When I first received my acceptance letter, I never imagined I'd be standing here talking about financial abuse and family fraud. But sometimes the hardest lessons come from the people closest to us. Movement at the back of the auditorium caught my eye. Dad slipped in quietly with Hamza, both giving me encouraging nods. My mother's sentencing is tomorrow, I continued. She's facing significant prison time for decades of systematic fraud. My brother is serving probation and making restitution payments. But this isn't a story about punishment. It's about protection. About recognizing that love shouldn't cost you your future. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Since my story went public, over 300 families have come forward with similar experiences. The FBI has opened investigations into multiple financial advisory firms that helped hide these transactions. Change is happening. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Lara. Watching your livestream. You're amazing. P.S. Got accepted to law school. The hardest part wasn't losing the money, I said, smiling at the memory of that first devastating bank statement. It was realizing that my family saw me not as a person with dreams, but as a resource to be exploited. They called it love. They called it family duty. But real love builds you up. It doesn't tear you down. The Dean of Financial Aid stepped forward. Ms. Hopkins has helped us establish new protocols for identifying and preventing family financial abuse. Her scholarship fund has already helped 3 students reclaim their education from similar situations. Applause filled the auditorium. As it died down, a student raised her hand. How did you find the courage to fight back? By realizing I wasn't alone. I gestured to where Hamza sat. My lawyer became my mentor. My father chose truth over comfort. My brother's ex-fiancé chose integrity over love. Every person who shared their story after mine showed me that standing up for yourself inspires others to do the same. Another hand. Have you spoken to your mother since the arrest? She writes letters, I admitted. Each one explains how she did it all for the family. How I've destroyed everything she built. Yesterday's letter was different, though. For the first time, she wrote 2 words I never expected. I'm sorry. The dean returned to the podium. We have time for one more question. What would you tell someone facing a similar situation? I took a deep breath. I'd tell them that family isn't supposed to be your prison, that love doesn't demand your dreams as sacrifice, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to people who think your future belongs to them. After the presentation, Dad hugged me tight. Your mom asked me to give you this. He handed me an envelope. It's her confession. Every account, every transaction, every person involved. She's cooperating fully with the FBI now. Better late than never, Hamza said, checking his phone. The DA says this could help dozens of other families recover their stolen funds. I have something for you too. Dad pulled out a small box. We found it in your mom's safety deposit box. Inside was Grandma's sapphire ring, the one Mom had claimed was lost years ago. She pawned it to pay for Jason's first car, Dad explained. I tracked it down and bought it back. It belongs to you now. I slipped it on, the blue stone catching the California sunlight. Ready for your first class? Hamza asked, checking his watch. Actually, I smiled, I'm teaching it. The law school asked me to guest lecture on financial fraud and family law. Dad's eyes welled up with pride. Your grandmother would have loved seeing you turn this pain into purpose. My phone buzzed again. Jason. Saw your speech online. Meeting with another family today to share my side of the story. Trying to help others avoid my mistakes. Hope that counts for something. Maybe it did. Maybe every story of fraud exposed. Every family member who chose honesty over exploitation. Every student who reclaimed their future. Maybe it all counted towards something better. I walked across the campus quad, where posters advertised next week's financial literacy workshop. Students stopped to snap photos with me, sharing their own stories of standing up to family pressure and financial abuse. The sapphire ring caught the light as I waved goodbye to Dad and Hamza. It felt right on my finger, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a symbol of what was gained. Strength, truth, purpose, and most importantly, the knowledge that sometimes fighting for your dreams means fighting the people who should have protected them in the first place. That's a lesson worth teaching.
I sat on the worn-out couch, a couch that once held stories of laughter and late-night movies. Now, it was just an old piece of furniture in a room filled with memories of a happier past. Sophie, my 3-year-old angel, was upstairs, her gentle breaths a stark contrast to the heavy air of our home. I glanced at the clock again. It was past 10 p.m. Mark was late, as had become his norm. The sound of the key turning in the lock finally broke the silence. I stood up, smoothing my shirt, not sure why I still bothered to look presentable for him. Mark, I called out as he stepped in, looking more a stranger than the man I married. You're late. He didn't meet my eyes, just grunted a response. Work. It's always work. His voice, once filled with warmth and affection, now carried a cold, distant tone. I tried to sound casual. Sophie asked about you today. She wanted to know when Daddy would be home. He shrugged off his coat, hanging it carelessly on the rack. Kids ask a lot of things. Doesn't mean we always have answers. I felt a twinge of pain in my heart. Maybe we could do something this weekend? Just the 3 of us? Sophie would love that. Mark snorted, his tone laced with sarcasm. A family outing? With everything that's going on? Don't be naive, Lily. My hands trembled slightly. This wasn't the man I fell in love with. It's important, Mark. She needs her father. He walked to the fridge, pulling out a beer. What she needs is a miracle, not me playing pretend in a park. I couldn't hold back my tears. She's your daughter, Mark. How can you be so cold? He took a swig of his beer, avoiding my gaze. I'm being realistic, Lily. This isn't the life I wanted. A sick child, a house that feels more like a hospital. I followed him into the kitchen, my voice rising. And what about me? Do you think I enjoy watching our daughter suffer? Do you think this is the life I dreamed of? Mark slammed the beer bottle on the counter. I don't know, Lily. I really don't. But I know I can't do this anymore. I felt a surge of anger. You want to walk away? From your own child? He drained his beer in one long gulp. I need space. I can't deal with this, suffocation. Suffocation? I echoed, disbelief in my voice. Is that what your family is to you now? Mark turned away, his shoulders tense. It's not just that. It's everything. The constant hospital visits, the medical bills, the way our lives revolve around Sophie's illness. I didn't sign up for this. I was at a loss for words. How had our love turned into this bitter reality? So, what's your plan, Mark? Leave us? Start over somewhere else? He didn't answer, just walked past me, his footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. I stood there, a mix of emotions churning inside me. Anger, sadness, and a profound sense of betrayal. Later, as I lay in bed, the space next to me cold and empty, I listened to the distant sound of Mark's TV from the other room. The divide between us had grown too vast to bridge. The man I married, the father of my child, was now a stranger living under the same roof. The hospital room was stark and clinical, a sharp contrast to the warm, lived-in feel of our home. Sophie lay in the small hospital bed, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. I sat beside her, holding her small hand, trying to draw strength from her innocent slumber. Nurse Janet walked in, her face a mask of professional kindness. How's our brave girl doing today, Lily? I managed a weary smile. She's a fighter. Always has been. Janet checked Sophie's vitals, her movements efficient and gentle. She's in good hands here. The surgery team is one of the best. I nodded, my throat tight with unspoken fears. I know. I just wish Mark could be here more. She keeps asking for him. Janet gave me a sympathetic look. Fathers often find it hard to cope with these situations. But you're doing an amazing job. I sighed, feeling the weight of loneliness. It's hard doing it alone, you know? He's just not the same anymore. As if on cue, Mark walked in, his arrival less comforting than I had hoped. He glanced at Sophie and then at me, his expression unreadable. How is she? The same, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He fiddled with his phone, avoiding eye contact. I can't stay long. Work's crazy. I felt a flash of anger. Work, right. Because that's what's important right now. Mark looked up, his eyes cold. What do you want from me, Lily? To sit here and watch her sleep? I bit back a sharp retort, focusing on Sophie instead. She asked for you today, Mark. She misses her dad. He shrugged, his detachment like a physical barrier. I'm here, aren't I? Before I could respond, Sophie stirred, her little voice weak but clear. Daddy? Mark's face softened momentarily as he moved closer to her. Hey, princess. Daddy's here. Sophie smiled faintly, reaching out for him. Stay with me, Daddy? I watched, a mix of hope and sorrow in my heart. Mark hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. I can't stay long, Sophie. Daddy has to work. Her smile faded, a look of understanding far beyond her years in her eyes. It's okay, Daddy. I love you. Mark forced a smile, patting her hand. I love you too, kiddo. As he stood to leave, I felt a surge of resentment. She needs you, Mark. We need you. He paused, his back to us. I'm doing what I can, Lily. But his words rang hollow in the sterile room. I watched him leave, a familiar sense of abandonment settling over me. Sophie's hand gripped mine, her small presence a reminder of the fight ahead of us. The room fell silent again, save for the beeping of the monitors. I leaned closer to Sophie, whispering promises of better days. Promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But in that moment, all I had was hope and the unwavering love for my daughter. The silence in the room was broken by a call from my friend Lisa, who worked as a realtor for a local company. I sat in the dimly lit hospital cafeteria, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. My mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and shock after Lisa's call. Mark was selling our house, our home. Anger and disbelief swirled within me, fueling a determination I hadn't felt in months. Lisa slid into the seat across from me, her expression a mix of concern and anger. I can't believe he's doing this, Lily. Selling your house while you're here, with Sophie. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I need you to delay the sale, Lisa. Buy me some time. Lisa nodded, her eyes hard. I'll do what I can, but we don't have much time. He's pushing for a quick sale. I leaned forward, my voice low and firm. I won't let him get away with this. He thinks he can just steal my house and run off with whoever she is? Lisa reached out, her hand gripping mine. Do you have a plan? A plan. The word echoed in my mind. I had been reactive for too long, letting life and Mark's indifference dictate my days. But not anymore. I'm going to fight back. I'll start by talking to a lawyer. There has to be a way to stop this. Lisa's expression shifted to one of support. Good. You fight this, Lily. And I'm here, every step of the way. I nodded, feeling a spark of resolve. And I'll need to gather evidence. Proof of his betrayal, the fraud. Anything that can help my case. Let's start with the house sale, Lisa suggested. I'll dig up everything I can on the buyer, the deal, anything out of the ordinary. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness mirroring my mood. I can't believe he's doing this to me, to Sophie. After everything we've been through. Lisa's hand tightened around mine. He's a coward, Lily. And he's going to regret underestimating you. I stood up, my resolve strengthening. He's going to pay for this, Lisa. He's going to pay for hurting my daughter, for trying to take away our home. I'll make sure of it. Lisa stood with me, her eyes fierce. Let's do this, Lily. Let's show him he picked the wrong woman to mess with. Hidden from view, I stood just outside the realtor's office, my heart racing. Through the slightly ajar door, I could hear the voices inside. Mark was there, his tone smooth and confident as he spoke to the potential buyers. And she was there too, his mistress, her laughter tinkling like a bell, completely oblivious to the storm she was a part of. I watched as Mark handed over a stack of papers to the buyers. His charm was on full display, the same charm that had once swept me off my feet. This is a fantastic opportunity, he was saying. A beautiful house, great location, you're getting a steal. The buyers, a middle-aged couple, nodded, their expressions a mix of eagerness and caution. The wife leafed through the documents, her husband leaning over to look. It all seems in order, she murmured. Mark's mistress, a young woman with bright red lipstick, laughed and leaned closer to Mark. Told you it would be easy, she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay put, to observe. This was about gathering evidence, understanding the depth of Mark's deceit. The husband looked up, a question in his eyes. And the current owner? She's agreed to all this? Mark's response was swift, a lie so smooth it sounded like truth. Absolutely. She's moved on. Wants to sell the place quickly. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. How could he lie so blatantly? The audacity of it made my blood boil. Lisa, who was playing her part in my game, intervened. We can proceed with the sale as soon as you're ready. The couple exchanged a look, then nodded. We're ready. This is a deal we don't want to miss. I watched as they began to sign the papers, the finality of each stroke like a dagger in my heart. But I needed to stay focused. This was not the time for emotions, it was the time for action. Mark's laughter brought me back to the moment. He was toasting with the buyers, his mistress clinging to his arm. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. I stepped into the room, my gaze fixed on Mark. "Enjoying yourself, Mark?" Everyone turned, shock and confusion on their faces. Mark's smile faltered. "Lily, what are you doing here?" I walked up to them, my steps firm. "I'm here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life." Mark's mistress scoffed, rolling her eyes. "What are you talking about? The deal is done." I smiled, but it was cold, devoid of any warmth. "Is it, now? Because I don't remember signing off on selling my house." The buyers looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances. "We were told everything was in order," the husband said, his voice uncertain. Mark stepped forward, trying to assert control. "Lily, you're confused. This is for the best." I shook my head. "No, Mark. The only confusion here is yours if you think you can forge my signature and get away with it." The room went silent. Mark's face turned a shade paler. "You can't prove anything," he blurted out. I pulled out a set of documents from my bag. "Actually, I can. And I have. These are the real papers. The ones you have are forgeries." Mark's mistress tugged at his arm. "Mark, what's she talking about? Tell me this isn't true." But Mark was speechless, his usual confidence shattered. That's when the door opened, and 2 police officers walked in. One of the officers looked directly at Mark. "Mark Johnson? You're under arrest for fraud and forgery." Mark's face drained of color. He looked at me, his eyes filled with disbelief. "You called the cops?" I met his gaze, my voice steady. "Yes, I did. You broke the law, Mark. And you tried to steal my home." As the officers handcuffed Mark, his mistress started to cry, her makeup smearing. The buyers quickly gathered their things, eager to distance themselves from the situation. One of the officers turned to me. "We'll need your statement, ma'am." I nodded, feeling a sense of justice. "Of course, officer." As they led Mark away, he looked back at me, his expression a mix of anger and regret. But I felt no sympathy. He had made his choice, and now he was facing the consequences. Lisa smiled at me, nodding her head approvingly. I smiled back and left the office, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I had stood up for myself and Sophie. I had fought back. And this was just the beginning. After Mark's arrest, I found myself in the lawyer's office, the walls lined with law books and the air heavy with the scent of leather. My lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was a no-nonsense man in his 50s, his face etched with lines of experience. He glanced at the file in front of him. "Lily, your husband's actions have opened up a big can of worms. The fraud charge is serious." I sat across from him, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "I know, Mr. Thompson. But I couldn't let him get away with it. Not after everything." Mr. Thompson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I respect that. Now, about the divorce and custody battle. You're in a strong position, but it won't be easy." I leaned forward. "I'm ready for it. I have to do this for Sophie. She deserves a stable home." The lawyer shuffled some papers. "What about alimony and child support? Given Mark's likely incarceration, it's going to be complicated." I sighed, a mix of determination and sadness in my voice. "I want what's fair for Sophie. She's my priority." As for Mark, he made his choices. Mr. Thompson looked at me, his expression serious. "You're a strong woman, Lily. We'll fight for what's right for you and your daughter." As I left the office, my phone rang. It was Mark. I hesitated but answered. "What do you want, Mark?" His voice came through, laced with desperation. "Lily, please. I messed up. I know that. But don't take Sophie away from me." I stopped in my tracks, anger rising. "You thought about Sophie when you tried to sell our house? When you spent your days with that woman?" He was silent for a moment. I lost my way. But I'm her father, Lily. I love her. I clenched my phone tighter. Love isn't just words, Mark. It's actions. You failed us both. Mark's voice cracked. I'll do anything to make it right. Please, Lily. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. It's too late for that. You'll see Sophie, but only under supervised visits. That's non-negotiable. There was a pause, then a soft, defeated sigh from Mark. Okay, I understand. The days were a whirlwind. I spent most of my time with Sophie, ensuring she felt loved and secure amidst the chaos. Her laughter was a balm to my wounded heart. One afternoon, while Sophie napped, I received a call from my sister, Laura. Hey, Lily, how are you holding up? Laura's voice was always a mix of concern and strength. I sighed, staring out the window. I'm managing, Laura. It's tough, but I'm getting through it. Laura was silent for a moment. I heard about Mark. I'm so sorry, Lily. But I'm proud of you for standing up to him. I smiled faintly. Thanks, Laura. It's hard, but I have to be strong for Sophie. She needs me now more than ever. Laura's voice softened. And what about you? Who's being strong for Lily? Her question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on Sophie and the legal battle that I hadn't given much thought to myself. I don't know, Laura. I guess I haven't had time to think about that. Laura was firm. You need to take care of yourself too, Lily. You can't pour from an empty cup. I knew she was right. I'll try, Laura. It's just, everything feels overwhelming right now. You're not alone, Lily. Remember that. I'm here for you, always. The next day, I visited a therapist, Dr. Martin. His office was a small, cozy room with soft lighting and a comfortable couch. He greeted me with a warm smile. Lily, it's good to meet you. How can I help you today? I took a deep breath, unloading my worries and fears. I just feel so lost, Dr. Martin. Everything I knew, everything I trusted, it's all been turned upside down. Dr. Martin nodded, his voice gentle. It's understandable to feel that way after what you've been through. But it's important to remember that this is a chapter in your life, not the whole story. His words resonated with me. Over the next few weeks, I started to take small steps towards reclaiming my life. I joined a support group for single parents. The first meeting was daunting, but as I listened to others share their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. Welcome, Lily, said the group leader, a kind woman named Beth. We're here to support each other, to share our struggles and our victories. I shared my story, my voice steady but filled with emotion. The group listened, their faces a tapestry of empathy and understanding. After the meeting, a woman named Sarah approached me. Your story is inspiring, Lily. You're stronger than you realize. Her words lifted my spirits. Maybe I was stronger than I thought. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn this painful chapter into a story of resilience and hope. Sitting in my living room, the early morning light filtering through the curtains, I reflected on the tumultuous journey that had led to this moment of tranquility. The divorce papers, now signed and finalized, lay on the coffee table, a testament to my newfound independence. The legal battle had been long and arduous. I had sued Mark for a substantial portion of his property, determined to secure a stable future for Sophie and myself. The court's decision had been in our favor. Mark, now serving a real sentence for his fraudulent activities, had lost much of what he had once held dear. His mistress, caught in the web of deceit, was slapped with a hefty fine, payable to me as restitution. I remembered sitting in the courtroom, watching Mark and his mistress turn on each other, each trying to deflect blame. There was no love lost between them, only bitter accusations and desperate attempts to save themselves. Watching them, I felt a sense of satisfaction. They had gotten what they deserved. Their betrayal and greed had led them to this downfall. But amidst the chaos of legal proceedings and emotional upheavals, there was a silver lining. Sophie, my brave little girl, had made a swift recovery after her surgery. Her laughter and energy filled our home with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. As I sipped my morning coffee, I thought about our future. It was a future I had fought hard for, a future that seemed bright and promising. Sophie was my priority, my beacon of hope. Together, we had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. I glanced at the pictures on the mantel, images of Sophie and me at the park, at the zoo, smiling and carefree. They were more than just photographs, they were reminders of our resilience, our ability to find joy amidst adversity. Sophie bounded into the room, her hair a tousled mess, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" I smiled, my heart swelling with love. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to have a great day." She clapped her hands, her laughter echoing through the room. "Yay! I love the park." As I watched her play, I realized that this was what mattered the most. The struggles, the pain, and the betrayal were behind us. What lay ahead was a path of healing and new adventures.
I'm Mila, a 36-year-old woman living what I thought was a fairly ordinary life. I married my college sweetheart, Jack, a man who was once my rock. We didn't have kids, just the two of us and our dreams, living in a house that was finally ours, mortgage-free. This house was a symbol of our years together, bought on a mortgage that we aggressively paid down, especially after I used the inheritance from my dad to make the final payments. Our life was simple but content, or so I believed. Jack, tall and usually unflappable with his finance job, was my partner in everything. We had our share of arguments, like any couple, but I always felt we were a team. His parents, George and Martha, had become like my own. George, a burly, kind-hearted man with a booming laugh, and Martha, a gentle soul who had taken me under her wing from day one. Our relationship was one of mutual respect and affection. Tonight was supposed to be a small celebration, just George and us, marking the end of our mortgage payments. The house was warmly lit, and I had spent the day cooking George's favorite dishes. I remember glancing at the clock, noting Jack's unusual lateness. George arrived first, cheerful as always, but with an undercurrent of concern for his son's tardiness. We chatted in the kitchen, George regaling me with stories of his youth, his laughter filling the room. But as the night grew older, my anxiety crept in. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I rushed to open it, expecting Jack, maybe with a story of traffic or a last-minute work emergency. What I saw instead felt like a scene from a movie. Jack stood there, not alone, but with a young, stylish woman clinging to his arm. She had an air of confidence, almost defiance, as she scanned our home, her eyes lingering on the pictures of our life together on the walls. "Jack, what's going on?" I managed to get out, my voice a mix of confusion and rising anger. Jack looked different. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a cold, almost cruel smirk. "This is Lana," he said nonchalantly, his grip on her waist possessive. "She's going to be my wife." The words hit me like a freight train. Wife? Jack, are you joking? What about us? Our life together? George, who had come to see what the commotion was about, looked as shocked as I felt. "Jack, son, what are you saying? Mila is your wife." Lana finally spoke, her voice sharp and businesslike. "Looks like a nice place. We'll probably change a few things once it's ours." Jack's next words felt surreal. "Mila, I want a divorce. It's time you left." I was stunned, my mind racing. "Divorce? Jack, we built this life together, and you want to throw it away for her?" George's face was red with anger and disbelief. "Jack, think about what you're doing. This is madness." Jack shrugged, dismissive. "My mind's made up. Start packing, Mila. This house isn't yours anymore." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as George took my arm. "Mila, let's go. You don't need to take this." We left the house, my home, a place filled with memories now tainted by betrayal. I spent the night at George and Martha's, their kindness a small comfort in the storm of my suddenly shattered life. I woke up in George and Martha's guest room, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The events of last night replayed in my mind, each detail a fresh jab of pain. I could hear George and Martha in the kitchen, their voices a low murmur. Dragging myself out of bed, I stumbled into the kitchen, where George was making coffee and Martha was setting the table. They both looked up as I entered, their faces a mix of concern and anger. "Morning, Mila," George said gruffly, handing me a cup of coffee. "Slept any?" "Not really," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Feels like a nightmare." Martha came over and gave me a hug. "That boy has lost his mind, Mila. You don't deserve this." I sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth but not much else. "I don't know what to do, Martha. My whole life just turned upside down." George slammed his cup on the table, his usual jovial demeanor gone. "We'll not let him get away with this, Mila. He can't just throw you out like yesterday's garbage." Martha nodded, her eyes fierce. "You've put too much into that house, into that marriage. It's not right." I felt a surge of anger, thinking about Jack and Lana in my house. I paid for most of that house. My inheritance, my savings. George's eyes lit up. "That's it. You have rights, Mila. That house is as much yours as it is his." Martha was quick to agree. "Yes, you need to fight for what's yours. Don't let that woman take everything from you." I started to feel a fire building inside me, fueled by their support. "You're right. I won't let Jack and his mistress walk all over me." George stood up, determination on his face. "We'll get a lawyer, someone who can sort this mess out. You won't be alone in this, Mila." Martha squeezed my hand. "We're with you, every step of the way. That boy needs a lesson on how to treat people." Sitting there with them, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. But I knew it was going to be a long, hard fight. The morning at George and Martha's had stirred something in me, a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in a long time. I spent the day buried in financial records, piecing together every contribution I'd made towards our home. The dining table was littered with bank statements, mortgage documents, and old receipts, tangible proof of my investment in what was supposed to be our shared dream. George, sitting across from me, was meticulously going through each document. "Look at this, Mila. You've paid more than half of the mortgage and that's not even counting your inheritance. You have a strong claim to the house." I nodded, my fingers tracing the figures that represented years of my life. "I'm going to call Jack. He needs to understand he can't just erase me from his life and take everything we built together." Martha, who had been brewing some coffee, set a cup in front of me. "Be clear and stand your ground, Mila. He's used to walking all over you, but not this time." I dialed Jack's number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Mila? What do you want?" His voice was dismissive, cold. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "Jack, I've been looking over our finances. It turns out I've put more money into the house. My inheritance, my savings, it adds up to me owning 2/3 of the house." There was a brief silence on the line. "You're joking, right?" "No, Jack. I'm dead serious. I've calculated it all. If you want to keep the house, you need to buy out my share. That's $266,000. I could almost hear his sneer through the phone. "You think you can just demand money out of the blue?" "This isn't a demand, Jack. It's what I'm owed. It's fair. You can either pay me, or we sell the house and split the money. Your choice." Jack's voice was laced with annoyance. "Fine, you'll get your money. But after this, we're done." I hung up, my heart racing. "He agreed to pay," I said, half in shock. George was beaming with pride. You did good, Mila. Standing up to him like that. Martha came over and hugged me. I'm proud of you, Mila. You're taking control of your life again. That afternoon, as I sorted through more paperwork, George and Martha shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs, reminding me that resilience was a family trait. We discussed lawyers, next steps, and strategies, turning their kitchen into a war room of sorts. As evening fell, George cooked dinner, a simple stew that filled the house with a comforting aroma. We ate together, talking about everything but the situation at hand, giving me a much-needed break from the stress. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. With George and Martha's support, I had a fighting chance. And as I drifted off to sleep, I clung to that thought like a lifeline. The morning of the divorce proceedings, I walked into the lawyer's office with a steely resolve. The office was cold and sterile, the kind of place where futures were dismantled and rearranged. Jack entered, his face an emotionless mask. He wasn't alone. Lana, his mistress, was glued to his side. Her confidence seemed forced, a thin veneer over her uncertainty. I could feel their surprise as they saw me sitting there, calm and composed. Before Jack could even find his words, I cut to the chase. I'm pregnant, Jack. Jack's eyes widened, his composure slipping. What? Pregnant? Lana's face twisted from confidence to confusion and then to rage. You said you hadn't touched her in months. You lying jerk. I ignored her outburst and continued, I'm asking for alimony, Jack. $800 a month, for the next 21 years. For our child. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man with a stern face, nodded in approval. Given the circumstances, Mrs. Smith's request is perfectly reasonable. Jack looked like he had been punched. This is insane. You can't just spring this on me and expect me to pay up. I met his gaze squarely. I can and I am. You made your bed, now lie in it. You owe this to our child, if not to me. Lana was fuming, her voice shrill with anger. Jack, you can't do this. She's clearly trying to trap you. Jack, flustered and overwhelmed, ran a hand through his hair. I need time to think. Mr. Harris interjected, Mr. Smith, the law is clear. You have a financial responsibility to your child. Jack slumped into the chair, defeated. Fine, he muttered. I'll pay the alimony. As they left, Lana was hissing into Jack's ear, her facade of poise completely shattered. I remained seated, feeling a mixture of triumph and sadness. This wasn't just about the money, it was about standing up for myself and my future child. In the following weeks, I worked with Mr. Harris to iron out the details. He was impressed with my resolve, often remarking on my newfound toughness. You're not the same woman who walked into my office a month ago, he said during one of our meetings. I smiled, feeling a sense of empowerment. I guess I'm not. I have someone else to think about now. As I left his office after signing the final papers, I felt a sense of closure. The battle was tough, but I had come out stronger. I was ready to face whatever came next, not just for me, but for my child as well. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a say in it. After the tumultuous divorce proceedings, I found an unexpected source of strength in Jack's parents, George and Martha. We sat in their cozy living room, a stark contrast to the cold lawyer's office, plotting our next move. George, always a man of action, was pacing the room. We need to show that scoundrel he can't just trample over our family, he said, his voice tinged with anger. Martha, ever the strategist, added, we've got to be smart about this. We can't just barge in there and make a scene. I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. I agree. But what can we do? He's made his bed with Lana. George stopped pacing and turned to me. What if we visit them? Regularly. Make our presence felt. Remind Jack of the family he's turning his back on. Martha's eyes lit up. Yes, and it'll drive that little homewrecker up the wall. She won't like us being around, reminding her of what she's done. I couldn't help but smile at their cunning plan. You think it'll work? Make her uncomfortable? George grinned. Oh, I'm sure it will. We'll be the most annoying, ever-present in-laws. She won't know what hit her. Martha clapped her hands together. We'll start tomorrow. A nice, long, unannounced visit. The next day, we executed our plan. George rang the doorbell of what used to be my home, a big smile plastered on his face as Jack opened the door. Son. We thought we'd drop by. Spend some quality time together, George boomed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Lana appeared behind Jack, her smile forced. Oh, what a surprise. And what is she doing here? Martha breezed past her, adding, she's with us. We just couldn't stay away. It's been too long. We spent hours there, talking loudly, laughing, and reminiscing about old times, pointedly ignoring Lana's growing discomfort. Every time she tried to interject or change the subject, George or Martha skillfully steered the conversation back. As we left, Lana's frustration was evident. She was fuming, barely managing a fake smile. In the car, Martha chuckled. Did you see her face? She was about to explode. George was laughing too. We're just getting started. That girl has no idea what she's in for. I sat in the back seat, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. It was a small, petty victory, but after everything that had happened, it felt good to take some control back, to push back against the injustice of it all. With George and Martha by my side, I felt stronger, ready to face whatever came next. A few weeks after our in-law intervention strategy began, I received unexpected news from Martha during one of our coffee chats. Mila, you won't believe it. Jack's put the house up for sale, she said, her voice a mix of shock and satisfaction. I almost choked on my coffee. What? Why would he do that? Martha shrugged. Seems like Lana can't stand us being around. She's pushing him to move. I pondered the situation, an idea slowly forming in my mind. Martha, what if I bought the house back? George, who had been quietly reading the newspaper, looked up. Buy it back? You think that's a good idea? I nodded. Yes, but at a lower price. Jack's desperate, and I have the money from the settlement. It's perfect. Martha smiled slyly. That would be quite the turn of events. Imagine Lana's face if she knew. I contacted a realtor friend, explaining the situation and my plan. She agreed to help, ensuring my identity remained hidden during the negotiations. A week later, I sat with my realtor friend, discussing our strategy. Jack's asking for a high price, but we know he's desperate. Let's lowball him. My realtor nodded. I'll start the negotiations. He won't know it's you until the deal is sealed. The negotiations went back and forth for days. Finally, Jack caved, accepting a much lower offer than his initial asking price. My realtor friend called me with the news. We got it, Mila. He accepted the offer, she said, barely containing her excitement. I couldn't help but laugh. I can't believe it. I'm buying my house back. The day we closed the deal, I met my realtor at the office. You're now the proud owner of your old house, she said, handing me the keys. The day I reclaimed my house was a day of triumph. I stood outside the familiar front door, the weight of the keys in my hands symbolizing so much more than mere ownership. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and apprehension as I prepared to face Jack and Lana one last time in what was once our shared home. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside. The sight of Jack and Lana, surrounded by boxes in the midst of packing, brought a sense of surreal finality. They both looked up, shock and disbelief etched on their faces. What the hell, Mila? How did you get in here? Jack's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I couldn't help but smirk. "Oh, didn't you hear? I'm the new owner." Surprise! Lana's face turned a shade of red, her eyes wide in shock. "You? This has to be some kind of sick joke." Crossing my arms, I leaned against the door frame. "No joke, Lana. I bought the house. It's mine now, and you two are trespassing." Jack's face contorted with anger. "This is low, even for you, Mila. You think you can just waltz back in here and take over?" I straightened up, my voice firm and unwavering. "Yes, Jack, that's exactly what I'm doing. You wanted me out, and now I'm back. My house, my rules. Time for you to leave." Lana, fuming, spat out, "You can't do this. We have rights." I walked into the living room, standing my ground. "The only right you have right now is to walk out of my house. I suggest you do it quickly." Jack, realizing the futility of arguing, began to gather his belongings. Lana followed suit, her movements jerky with frustration. As they left, Lana hissed at me, "You haven't won anything, Mila." Watching them leave, I felt a surge of empowerment. This house, which had witnessed the rise and fall of my marriage, was now a symbol of my resilience. It was a battleground where I had emerged victorious. After the door closed behind them, I walked through the empty rooms. Each space echoed with memories, both good and bad, but now it was time to make new ones. I envisioned the house filled with laughter and love once more, a sanctuary for me and my future child. Sitting down in the quiet living room, I allowed myself a moment to take it all in. I had come full circle, but this time, I was in control, a victor reclaiming her kingdom. The journey had been fraught with pain and betrayal, but it had led me to this moment of triumph. My house, my rules, my life. I was ready to start anew, stronger and more determined than ever. One afternoon, as I was arranging the nursery for my soon-to-arrive baby, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find George and Martha, beaming with smiles. "Mila, dear, how are you holding up?" Martha asked as she stepped inside, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made. "I'm doing well, Martha." "Getting ready for the baby," I replied, leading them into the living room. George, carrying a bag of baby clothes, chuckled. "This little one is going to be spoiled rotten by us, you know that, right?" I laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I wouldn't have it any other way. As we sat, chatting and laughing, another knock came at the door. This time, it was Jack. He looked different, worn out, a little defeated. "Can we talk, Mila?" Jack's voice was low, lacking its usual confidence. I hesitated but nodded, stepping outside to talk to him privately. I messed up, Mila," Jack started, not meeting my eyes. "Lana left me. I'm broke, and I was hoping." I cut him off, my voice steady. "Hoping for what, Jack? For me to take you back? After everything?" Jack's face crumpled. "I know I don't deserve it, but I have nowhere else to go." I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a stranger filled with regrets. "Jack, I've moved on. I'm starting a new life, for me and my baby. You need to do the same." He nodded slowly, the reality of the situation sinking in. "I understand. I'm sorry, Mila." As he walked away, I felt a closure I didn't know I needed. Turning back to the house, I saw George and Martha watching through the window, their expressions a mix of concern and support. "He won't bother you again, will he?" George asked as I walked back in. I shook my head. "No, he won't. I made it clear." Martha hugged me. "You're so strong, Mila. We're so proud of you." Sitting back down, surrounded by the people who had become my true family, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led me here, to a place of strength and new beginnings. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape, and I looked forward to every moment of it. I remember that day clearly. It was a sunny Tuesday when I was about to meet Mark's parents for the first time. I was nervous but excited. Mark and I had been dating for 2 years, and he had finally popped the question. I had heard a lot about his parents, but we'd never met. Mark had always described his parents as traditional and a bit old-fashioned. I guess I didn't realize what that meant until I met them. We decided to meet at a local cafe. I arrived first, wearing my favorite blue dress, hoping to make a good impression. Mark arrived with his parents. His mom, Mrs. Thompson, wore a stern look and his dad, Mr. Thompson, seemed uninterested in everything around him. "Kate, these are my parents, John and Margaret Thompson," Mark introduced us. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I said with a smile. "Likewise," Mrs. Thompson replied, scanning me from head to toe. "Mark tells us you're a lawyer. Where do you work?" I was taken aback by her directness but managed to reply, "At Johnson and Partners, downtown." "And your salary? Must be good, being a lawyer and all," Mr. Thompson chimed in, his tone blunt. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "It's adequate for my needs," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "And where do you plan to live after the wedding?" I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd step in, but he just shrugged. "We're still discussing that," I said. "And your parents, what do they do?" Mr. Thompson asked, his voice almost demanding. "They run a small business," I replied, growing uncomfortable with the interrogation. Mrs. Thompson snorted. "Small business, huh? Let's hope they can contribute decently to the wedding." I felt a knot in my stomach. Mark noticed my discomfort but said nothing. As we ordered, Mrs. Thompson kept making side comments about the prices, and Mr. Thompson kept nodding in agreement. The whole meeting felt more like a business transaction than a family gathering. I remember thinking, is this what my future looks like? I tried to shrug off the feeling, telling myself it was just first meeting jitters. But deep down, I knew this was a red flag I couldn't ignore. It didn't take long after that first meeting for Mark's parents to become a constant, unsettling presence in my life. Their calls would come at any hour, disrupting my daily routine. Each ring of the phone started to feel like an intrusion. One evening, just as I was about to leave my office, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Kate, dear, I need you to look over some legal papers for us." "It's just a small favor," she said, her voice laced with expectation. I sighed, feeling the weight of her request. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm actually just heading out from work. Can it wait?" "Oh, it's just a quick look." "You can do it, can't you? For family," she pressed. I agreed reluctantly, knowing this was becoming a pattern. The next day, Mr. Thompson called. "Kate, I need help with setting up a new TV. Mark's busy, can you swing by?" Their requests were becoming more frequent and more demanding. I tried talking to Mark about it. "Mark, your parents are calling me all the time. For legal advice, for tech support, for everything," I said, hoping he'd understand. "They're just being friendly, Kate." "They're like that with everyone," Mark replied casually, brushing off my concerns. "But it's too much. They're calling me at work, at odd hours." "I'm feeling overwhelmed," I insisted. "Come on, Kate. They're harmless. Just trying to bond with you," he said, not meeting my eyes. I felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. It was as if Mark was completely blind to his parents' overbearing behavior. One evening, as we were having dinner at my place, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, again. "Kate, can you come over tomorrow? I need some advice on redecorating the living room." "You have such good taste," she said. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm not really an interior designer." I started, but she cut me off. But you have such a lovely home. I insist. We'll have lunch, she said, making it sound more like a command than a request. I hung up, feeling trapped. Mark just shrugged and said, "See? They really like you." But to me, it felt more like they were taking advantage of me, and Mark's indifference was only making it worse. I started to wonder if this was what my future with Mark would be like, constantly being at the beck and call of his parents, with no support from him. It was a Friday evening when Mark suggested we go out for dinner with his parents. He chose a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind where you'd think twice before checking the prices on the menu. I had a hunch it wouldn't be a casual, relaxing dinner, and boy, was I right. We arrived at the restaurant, and the Thompsons were already there, scanning the menu. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up when she saw the lobster and steak options. "Kate, you simply must try the lobster here. It's divine!" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. I glanced at the menu and saw the price. It was more than I wanted to spend, but before I could respond, Mr. Thompson chimed in. "Mark told us you're doing well at your firm. Surely, a successful lawyer like you can afford a little splurge now and then," he said, his tone a bit too pointed. Feeling cornered, I smiled weakly and said, "Actually, I was thinking of something lighter, maybe a salad." Mrs. Thompson looked at me as if I had suggested something outrageous. "A salad? Nonsense, you're at one of the best restaurants in town. You must try their specialties." I felt uncomfortable, but decided not to argue. I didn't want to cause a scene. As we were eating, the conversation revolved around Mark and his achievements, with his parents occasionally throwing in a question or two about my work, but not really listening to my answers. Then came the moment of truth, the bill. Mr. Thompson patted his pockets and then looked at his wife with a feigned expression of surprise. "Oh dear, I think I left my wallet at home," he said, his voice a little too calm for someone who'd just dined lavishly on someone else's dime. Mrs. Thompson joined in the charade. "John, how could you be so forgetful? I don't have mine either." I looked at Mark, expecting him to step in, but he just shrugged and mumbled, "I guess I forgot my card too." I couldn't believe it. Were they serious? It was clear this wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt more like a setup. With a sinking feeling, I pulled out my card and handed it to the waiter. Mrs. Thompson smiled sweetly at me. "Thank you, dear. You're such a lifesaver." As we left the restaurant, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Was I just a walking wallet to them? And why didn't Mark say anything? With the wedding drawing nearer, it became increasingly clear that it was time for our parents to meet. Given all my experiences with Mark's parents, I was bracing myself for this encounter. I remember pacing in my living room, phone in hand, rehearsing how I'd break the news to my parents. I finally mustered the courage and called them. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I think it's time you met Mark's parents," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Kate, we've been so excited about this. When can we meet them?" Mom's voice was a mix of enthusiasm and curiosity. I took a deep breath before adding a cautious note. "Just to give you a heads up, they're a bit, well, intense." Dad's voice came through with a chuckle. "Kate, we've seen all sorts in our days. Don't you worry, we'll manage." His confidence was comforting, but I couldn't shake off my apprehensions. We decided the Grandview Hotel, known for its pleasant ambience and beautiful surroundings. It was a familiar place to me, which I hoped would provide a distraction if things got too intense. The next day, I mentioned the plan to Mark over breakfast. "So, we're meeting at the Grandview Hotel this Saturday. I think it'll be nice for our parents to meet in a neutral, relaxed setting." Mark nodded, absorbed in his phone. "Sure, sounds good. I'll let my folks know." I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparation. I wanted to ensure that everything was perfect, hoping it would help keep the peace. As the day grew closer, my nerves began to fray. I found myself obsessing over every little detail, from what I would wear to how I would steer the conversation away from any potentially sensitive topics. On the eve of the meeting, I lay awake, scenarios running through my head. What if Mark's parents said something offensive? What if my parents didn't like them? What if the whole lunch turned into a disaster? The morning of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I chose a simple but elegant dress, hoping to strike the right balance between casual and formal. Mark, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed by the significance of the day. "It's just lunch, Kate. Everything will be fine," he said nonchalantly as he got dressed. His calmness did little to soothe my anxiety. If anything, it made me feel more alone in my concerns. I wondered if he truly understood how his parents' behavior had been affecting me, or if he was just choosing to ignore it. As we drove to the hotel, I went over the plan in my head. Keep the conversation light, avoid controversial topics, and try to ensure everyone gets along. Simple, right? The Grandview Hotel looked stunning as always, its elegant facade basking in the afternoon sun. As Mark and I walked into the lobby, my stomach was doing somersaults. I spotted my parents first, sitting in the lounge area. They stood up as we approached, smiles on their faces. "Kate, dear, you look wonderful," my mom said, giving me a reassuring hug. Dad gave me a firm, supportive pat on the back. Mark's parents arrived shortly after. The air seemed to change as soon as they walked in. Mrs. Thompson's eyes scanned the lobby like she was assessing the value of every item. "Nice place you've chosen, Kate," Mr. Thompson commented dryly, as he shook hands with my parents. "We thought it'd be a lovely spot for everyone to get together," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. We moved to the dining area, and that's when things took an unexpected turn. A hotel employee approached us with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry, but we're a bit overbooked today. We only have a few single rooms and 2 triple rooms available," he explained. "One of the triple rooms is our finest suite, with all amenities. The other is more basic and close to the road, so it can be a bit noisy," he added. Before I could say anything, Mrs. Thompson jumped in. "Well, obviously, John, Mark, and I will take the suite. Kate, you can cover the cost, right? After all, you organized this meeting." I was taken aback by her audacity. Well, I was thinking my parents and I could take the suite, But Mrs. Thompson cut me off. "Nonsense. We're the guests. And besides, you're the one with the big lawyer salary." My dad, trying to defuse the situation, suggested, "Why don't we discuss this over lunch and decide afterward?" Lunch was a tense affair. Conversation was forced, and I noticed Mark's parents sizing up my folks, their comments edged with subtle digs. My parents, to their credit, kept their cool, responding with grace and humor. As we neared the end of the meal, the room topic resurfaced. Mrs. Thompson was adamant. "We should get the suite. It's only proper. Kate can afford it." Mark, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Mom's right. It's important they're comfortable." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really siding with them over this? My mom, ever the peacemaker, suggested, "Why don't we let the hotel decide? They can assign rooms based on availability." But Mrs. Thompson wouldn't have it. "Kate said you have a small business. I think you're not used to luxury. The simplest room should suit you. It is just designed for people with small incomes." The tension was palpable. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about rooms, it was about respect, something Mark's parents seemed to have little of, especially for me and my family. As the tension in the hotel lobby mounted, my father, George, cleared his throat and stepped forward, commanding everyone's attention. "There's something you all should know," he said, his voice calm and assertive. Mark, his parents, and I all looked at him, curious and a bit confused. "This hotel," Dad continued, along with several others across the country, "belongs to our family business." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Mrs. Thompson's mouth dropped open, and Mr. Thompson's eyes widened in shock. Mark turned to me, his face a mix of surprise and disbelief. "You own this hotel?" Mrs. Thompson finally managed to sputter out. "Yes, and a few more," Dad replied casually. "We've always preferred to keep a low profile." The hotel employee, recognizing my father, suddenly seemed very flustered. "Mr. Williams, I apologize for the inconvenience earlier. I had no idea." Dad dismissed his concerns with a wave. "It's fine. But we will be taking the suite, and Mark's family can have the other room. And there's no need for Kate to pay." Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson's demeanor shifted dramatically. She became excessively flattering, her tone oozing with a newfound affection. "George, Linda, what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea. You must be so proud of your accomplishments." Mark, who had been silent until now, turned to me, an eager look in his eyes. "Kate, this is incredible. We should move up our wedding date, don't you think?" I looked around at their changed faces, the forced smiles, the sycophantic attitudes. It was all too much, too fake. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. "Actually, Mark, there won't be a wedding. I'm calling off the engagement." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered, Mr. Thompson looked stunned, and Mark was speechless. "I can't be a part of a family that only values people for their wealth and status," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the pretense, the expectations, and a future that no longer felt right for me. As I walked away from the hotel, my heart pounding and my mind racing, I heard Mark's footsteps hurrying after me. "Kate, wait, please. Let's talk about this," he pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I stopped and turned to face him, feeling a surge of determination. "What is there to talk about, Mark? Your parents' behavior? Your indifference?" Before Mark could reply, Mrs. Thompson stormed up to us, her face red with anger. "Ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you," she spat out, her words laced with venom. I stared at her in disbelief. "Done for me? You've done nothing but disrespect me and my family." Mrs. Thompson's tirade continued, her words becoming more hurtful. "Stupid girl. You and your parents think you're better than us, don't you?" Mark looked torn between us, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. It was then that my father, George, stepped in. His voice was calm but carried an authority that stopped Mrs. Thompson in her tracks. "I think it's time for you to leave our hotel," he said firmly. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. "We're not going anywhere. You can't make us." Dad turned to the hotel staff. "Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Thompson out. They are no longer welcome here." The staff moved in, politely but firmly guiding Mark's parents away. Mrs. Thompson was still hurling insults over her shoulder as they left. Mark looked at me, a mix of confusion and regret in his eyes. "Kate, I'm sorry, I didn't expect." But I cut him off. "It's too late for sorry, Mark. Your silence said everything I needed to know." With those final words, I walked away from him, the sound of his mother's angry voice fading into the background. I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. It hurt to end things with Mark, but I knew it was the right decision. As I drove home, the weight of the day's events began to sink in. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. A chapter where I stood up for myself and refused to settle for anything less than what I deserved. The days following the breakup were a whirlwind of emotions. I oscillated between relief, sadness, and a newfound sense of freedom. The decision to end my engagement with Mark, though painful, felt like the first step towards a future where I respected my own worth. One evening, as I sat on my porch, my mom called. "Kate, how are you holding up, sweetheart?" Her voice was full of concern. I took a deep breath, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I'm doing okay, Mom. It's been hard, but I feel like it was the right decision." "You're stronger than you realize, Kate." "And we're so proud of you," she said warmly. I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for my supportive family. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you and Dad." There was a brief pause before she spoke again. "You know, sometimes the end of one thing is just the start of something new. Something better." Her words struck a chord in me. "You're right, Mom. This is a chance for a new beginning." In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work and spent time with friends who had been my pillars of strength. Their support was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone. One weekend, while having lunch with my best friend, Sarah, she said, "You know, Kate, I think you did something many wouldn't have the courage to do. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, stirring my coffee. It was tough, but I realized I have to be true to myself. I can't be in a relationship where I'm not valued. Sarah smiled, raising her glass. "To new beginnings and self-respect. May this be the start of something wonderful for you." I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a sense of optimism about the future. In the weeks that followed, I found a new sense of independence. I explored hobbies I'd put on the back burner and even started planning a solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. Life after Mark was different, but it was empowering. I realized that being on my own wasn't something to fear, but an opportunity to discover myself and what I truly wanted in life. As I packed my bags for the trip, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was my journey, my path to discovering who I was outside of a relationship. I was moving forward, not with bitterness, but with hope and an open heart, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. My name is Claire. At 29, I'm a chef at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. Cooking is my passion, my art. But let me tell you, my life isn't just about perfecting recipes. It's also about dealing with a recipe for disaster, namely, my mother-in-law, Margaret. I met Alex, my husband, in a way most people do these days, online. We clicked instantly. He was charming, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We married within a year, a small ceremony but filled with love. That's when Margaret entered the picture, and let's just say, she wasn't the typical doting mom. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first met her. Alex had arranged a dinner at our place. I remember being nervous, wanting to impress her. "Mom, this is Claire. She's an amazing chef," Alex had introduced me with pride in his voice. Margaret, a tall woman with sharp features, had looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my apron like it was a piece of alien clothing. "A chef, huh? I hope you can cook something more refined than diner food." I had chuckled, nervously. "I'll do my best to impress you." Dinner was my arena, and I had put my heart into it. The table was set with my best dishes, herb-crusted lamb, a delicate risotto, and a chocolate mousse to die for. Margaret had poked at her food, a frown forming as she tasted each dish. "Well, it's edible, I suppose. Not what we're used to, but it'll do." Alex had shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. That was Alex, always avoiding confrontation, especially with his mother. After dinner, as I was clearing the table, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. "Claire, dear, I hope you understand that Alex comes from a refined family. We have certain standards." I had nodded, trying to keep my cool. "I understand, Mrs. Thompson. I'll keep that in mind." She had sniffed, her gaze cold and calculating. "See that you do. My son deserves the best." That night, as Alex and I lay in bed, I turned to him. "Your mother is quite something." He had sighed, pulling me close. "She's always been like that. But don't worry, we'll manage." Manage, I thought. If only I had known then how much of an understatement that would be. It was a busy Friday night at the restaurant. The kind of night where the kitchen is a whirlwind of activity, and I'm in my element, orchestrating the chaos. That's when Margaret decided to grace us with her presence, unannounced. I was plating a delicate salmon dish when I saw her sweeping through the dining area like she owned the place. She had that look on her face, the kind that spelled trouble. My heart sank. I watched from the kitchen as she settled at a prime table, snapping her fingers for service. I wiped my hands on my apron, bracing myself for the inevitable. Emerging from the kitchen, I approached her table with a cautious smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson." "What a surprise! What can I get for you tonight?" She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Oh, Claire, darling. I thought I'd try your little restaurant. Bring me your best dishes. Spare no expense." I nodded, my mind racing. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson." The orders were extravagant: caviar, truffle pasta, the most expensive wine. As I prepared her dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When the bill arrived at her table, Margaret glanced at it, then waved it away. "Oh, I won't be needing this. Put it on Claire's tab. She's family, after all." My head chef, who had delivered the bill, came back to me with a puzzled look. "Claire, she says you're covering her bill." I felt a knot in my stomach. "Did she now?" I muttered, clenching my fists. I walked back to her table, the bill in hand. "Mrs. Thompson, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is a business, and..." Margaret cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, Claire. You can afford a little generosity for your family. It's the least you can do." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson, this is highly irregular. But she was already standing, her coat draped over her arm. "Don't make a scene, dear. It's unbecoming. Just take care of it." And with that, she left, leaving me with a bill that could pay my rent twice over. How could she? How could she just walk in and expect me to foot the bill for her extravagance? I felt used, cornered. And worst of all, I felt alone in this. Alex would just tell me to let it go, to keep the peace. But peace, I realized, came at a price. A price I was no longer sure I was willing to pay. Holidays. A time for family, laughter, and good food. Well, in my world, it meant one thing: cooking up a storm for Margaret's never-ending guest list and dealing with her endless demands. It was Thanksgiving, and as usual, Margaret had decided to host it at our place. "After all, Claire, you have the space, and you're such a good cook," she had said on the phone, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen, buried under a mountain of groceries that I had paid for, of course. The menu was a laundry list of Margaret's favorites, no regard for what I or anyone else liked. As I was peeling potatoes, Alex walked in, looking sheepish. "Babe, Mom called. She wants to add a few more dishes. Some relatives just RSVP'd." I looked at him, my hands covered in potato skins. "More dishes? Alex, I'm already swamped here." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I know, but you know how she is. It's just a few more people." "Just a few more people," I muttered. It was always just a few more people. The day of Thanksgiving was a blur. I cooked and cooked, the kitchen a battleground. When the guests started arriving, I was still in my apron, a whirlwind of pots and pans. Margaret swept into the kitchen, her nose in the air. "Claire, dear, do make sure everything is perfect. We have some very important guests." I forced a smile. "Everything's under control, Mrs. Thompson." The dinner was a hit, or so it seemed. I barely had time to sit down, let alone eat. Margaret played the gracious host, basking in the compliments, as if she had slaved over the stove all day. After the guests had left, I was clearing up, my back aching, my feet sore. That's when Margaret decided to give her feedback. "Claire, the turkey was a tad dry, and the cranberry sauce too tart. And really, dear, you could have dressed up a bit. You looked like a maid amongst the guests." I clenched my jaw, holding back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. I'll keep that in mind for next time, Mrs. Thompson. Alex, who had been silent all evening, finally spoke up. Mom, Claire worked hard. It was a great dinner. Margaret sniffed. Hard work is expected, Alexander. No need for praise. Good night. As I watched her leave, I wondered why I was putting up with this. Why I was allowing myself to be treated like a doormat, my efforts dismissed, my feelings ignored. Alex put an arm around me. Don't take it to heart, babe. Let's just go to bed. I nodded, too tired to argue. But inside, a storm was brewing. Something had to change, and soon. I never thought I'd be grateful for getting sick, but when I caught the flu right before Christmas, it felt like a twisted sort of blessing. Maybe now I'd get a break from Margaret's demands. Or so I thought. I was curled up on the couch, buried under blankets, a mountain of used tissues beside me. That's when my phone rang. It was Margaret, of course. Claire, dear, you do remember Christmas is at our place this year. You'll be cooking, won't you? Her voice was as cold as the winter outside. I croaked into the phone, Margaret, I'm really sick. I don't think I can. She cut me off, her tone icy. Sick? Convenient timing, I must say. We're counting on you, Claire. Don't be selfish. Selfish? I couldn't believe my ears. Margaret, I can barely stand up. I'm contagious. There was a pause, then a huff. Fine. We'll manage somehow. Don't expect us to be sympathetic. The call ended, and I was left staring at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Later that day, Alex came home, his face tense. Mom called me. She's really upset, Claire. She thinks you're faking it. Faking it? I sat up, the room spinning a bit. Alex, look at me. Do I look like I'm faking? He sat beside me, his expression softening. No, you look terrible. But you know how Mom is. She's stressed about Christmas. Stressed? What about me? Sick, exhausted, and now accused of lying. Alex, I need you to understand. I'm really sick. I can't cook for Christmas. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'll talk to her. Just rest, okay? Rest. Right. As if I could rest with Margaret's words echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of fever, chills, and restless sleep. Miraculously, I started feeling a bit better just before Christmas. Not great, but no longer on death's door. I told Alex, hoping for some understanding. Instead, he said, that's great, babe. So you can make it to Mom's for Christmas, right? I stared at him, my heart sinking. Alex, I'm still weak. I can't cook for everyone. He looked disappointed, almost hurt. But it's Christmas, Claire. Mom's expecting us. Can't you just make a small effort? Small effort? I was fighting to get out of bed, and he wanted a Christmas feast. No, Alex. I can't. And I won't. My voice was firm, a hint of the frustration I'd been bottling up coming through. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. As Christmas Eve approached, I was still reeling from the flu. There was no way I could cook an entire feast. I decided to take a stand. I won't be able to cook for Christmas, but I'll order dishes from the restaurant, I told Alex, my voice firm. He looked at me, puzzled. What? But Mom's expecting you to cook, like always. I shook my head. I can't, Alex. I'm still weak. She'll have to deal with it. He sighed, a look of resignation on his face. Okay, I'll tell her. Later, when Alex relayed the message to Margaret over the phone, I could hear her shrill voice from across the room. Order food? That's her solution? Fine, but she better not expect me to cook. Christmas Eve arrived, and the delivery man from my restaurant showed up with the food. Margaret was there to meet him, signing the delivery papers without so much as a glance. Little did she know what she was actually agreeing to. As we gathered for dinner, I could feel Margaret's eyes burning into me. Too lazy to cook, Claire? Taking the easy way out, I see. Her words stung, but I bit back a retort. Alex was silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. Throughout dinner, Margaret's comments flew fast and furious. Can't even cook a meal for her family. What kind of wife are you, Claire? I clenched my fists under the table, my patience wearing thin. Alex didn't say a word, his silence a heavy presence at the table. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, Margaret cornered me. You've outdone yourself with laziness this year, Claire. Can't even cook a simple Christmas dinner. I turned to her, my voice low but fierce. I was sick, Margaret. I did what I could. She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. Sick? Looks more like laziness to me. You've just taken the easy way out. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. I'm not your personal chef, Margaret. I'm not here to bend over backward for you. Her eyes widened in shock, and used to being spoken back to. But I was past caring. Alex finally spoke up, his voice weak. Mom, Claire's right. She was sick. But Margaret brushed him off, her gaze still fixed on me. You've made your point, Claire. Don't expect any sympathy from me. As all the guests gathered in the living room, I stood up, the eyes of the guests curiously fixed on me. A sly smile played on my lips, a sense of retribution fueling my courage. Before everyone leaves, I have something to say, I announced, my voice steady, yet loud enough to cut through the post-dinner chatter. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. What now, Claire? Another one of your excuses? No, Mrs. Thompson. It's about the dinner tonight, I replied, my satisfaction growing. You owe $5,000 for it. A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret's face transitioned from smugness to shock. Excuse me? $5,000? For what? I held up the invoice, detailing every item. For everything, the groceries, chef's labor, delivery. All of it. Her voice escalated, piercing the shocked silence. This is absurd. I will not pay for your incompetence. But you already agreed to, Mrs. Thompson, when you signed for the delivery, I countered, feeling a surge of power. She sputtered in disbelief. I signed for the delivery, not for this outrageous bill. From my folder, I produced the signed delivery papers. Unfortunately, you did. It's all legally binding. Alex, my husband, who had been a silent spectator, finally interjected, his voice laced with unease. Claire, isn't this a bit much? Margaret turned to him, her eyes alight with vindication. See, even your husband knows you're being unreasonable. I faced Alex, my resolve unwavering. It's not unreasonable, Alex. Your mother needs to understand the cost of her demands. Margaret stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I will not be swindled by you. One of the guests, an elderly aunt, spoke up tentatively. Margaret, dear, if you signed it, it does seem fair to honor it. Margaret shot her a withering look. Fair? This is daylight robbery. Alex tried to calm the waters. Mom, let's discuss this rationally. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Margaret shrieked. Claire is exploiting us. I interjected, my patience fraying. Exploiting? I'm asking to be paid for professional services, Mrs. Thompson. The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, the tension almost tangible. Margaret's gaze was venomous. This is a declaration of war, Claire. You will pay for this. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I'm standing up for myself, Mrs. Thompson. That's all. As she stormed out of the room, the guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Alex approached me, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. Claire, why did you have to do this? In front of everyone. I looked at him, a sense of finality settling in my heart. Because, Alex, it was time. Time to show that I won't be pushed around anymore. Not even by your mother. The guests began to disperse, the mood somber, the festive spirit lost. I knew this was a turning point, a moment that would define the future of my relationship with Margaret and maybe even with Alex. The morning after the Christmas debacle was a battleground in our kitchen. The air was thick with resentment and unsaid words. Alex had obviously talked to his mother before, broke the silence with a voice sharpened by anger. You humiliated my mother, Claire, in front of everyone. How could you? I slammed my coffee cup down, my patience frayed to its limits. Humiliated her? Alex, she's been walking all over me for years. When will you see that? He glared at me, his words cutting through the air. She's my mother, Claire. She was just being herself. You didn't have to go and make a scene. I stood up, my own anger rising. Being herself? You mean being overbearing, insulting, and downright disrespectful? And you never did a thing to stop her. He scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? She's always right, Claire. You just don't understand her. I stared at him in disbelief. Always right? Even when she treats me like dirt? Is that what you really think, Alex? He didn't back down. Yes, I do. She's my mother. She comes first. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me snap. First? What about your wife, Alex? Where do I come in your life? He didn't answer, just gave me a cold, hard look. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. You know what, Alex? I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. His face went from anger to shock. Divorce? You're going to throw away our marriage over this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, Alex. I'm saving myself. From your mother, and from a husband who won't stand up for his wife. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he just stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, a mix of anger, relief, and sadness swirling inside me. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. The chasm between us had grown too wide to bridge. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. Months had passed since I filed for divorce. The world I once knew had crumbled, but from its ashes, I was building something new, something that was mine. I found myself in the kitchen of my apartment, the morning sun casting a warm glow on the walls. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, a comforting presence in my newfound solitude. My phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. It was my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Claire. How are you holding up? Her voice was filled with concern. I took a sip of my coffee, a smile touching my lips. I'm good, Lisa. Really, I am. I feel free. She chuckled. That's great to hear. You sound better. I leaned against the counter. I am better. I'm focusing on myself now, my career. I'm rediscovering who I am, without Alex, without Margaret. There was a pause, and then she said, I'm proud of you, Claire. You're doing what's best for you. I sighed, a sense of contentment washing over me. Yeah, it's been tough, but I feel stronger, you know? I'm finally standing up for myself. Lisa's voice brightened. Speaking of standing up for yourself, How's the restaurant doing? I glanced out the window, a sense of determination building within me. It's going great. I've been creating new dishes, experimenting. I feel alive in the kitchen again. That's the Claire I know, Lisa said, her voice warm with affection. Hey, why don't you come over tonight? Cook us one of your amazing dishes, and we can catch up. I laughed, the sound light and genuine. I'd love that, Lisa. It'll be nice to cook for friends again. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen, a space that was once a battlefield of marital disputes and now a sanctuary of my independence. I picked up a photo from the counter, one of me and Alex in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the good times, the love that once was. Then, with a deep breath, I put the photo away in a drawer. It was part of my past, a chapter that had closed. As I prepared for the day, I felt a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. The divorce had been a difficult journey, but it was also a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. That evening, as I cooked in Lisa's kitchen, laughter and chatter filling the room, I realized this was what happiness felt like. No pretense, no pressure, just me being me. As we sat down to eat, Lisa raised her glass. To new beginnings, Claire. I raised mine, a smile spreading across my face. To new beginnings.